This is Aurora. You are listening to the Slow Boat Sailing Podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 13 of the Slow Boat Sailing Podcast. I'm Linus Wilson. On this episode, we talk to the crew of Wicked Salty. Both Wes and Kate sailed a Ericson 30-plus sailboat that they bought on Craigslist, and within a few months sailed to the Bahamas, and they cruised the Exumas, Nassau, the island of Eleuthera, and the Abacos in less than a year after buying a sailboat that they got for a pretty good price. It's definitely an inspiring story, and they produce a lot of great videos on YouTube, and you should definitely check them out. Much to the sadness of many sailors who watched their videos, they've decided to sell their boat, and we talk about that in this podcast, why they decided to sell their boat and what their future plans are. I can identify with their story quite a bit. We talk about how my family bought a 30-foot sailboat on Craigslist too, and it wasn't the right boat for us, but it was a great boat, and we had a lot of fun on it. And I'm so glad that the crew of Wicked Salty, the YouTube channel, had so much fun on the SV parody, and I hope that they will bring us along for their adventures on any new boat that they may have. The intro you heard was from Aurora, our newest patron on patreon.com. She joined the crew as a first mate level that entitled her, in addition to the free audiobook and all the bonus content, including a bonus episode which talks in depth about Wicked Salty's adventures in the Bahamas and how they overlapped with the slow boats adventures in the Bahamas and slow boat to the Bahamas. So first mate crew member on patreon.com/slowboatsailing gets a free PDF version of Slow Boat to the Bahamas, my number one bestseller on Amazon.com, sailing ebooks, and in addition to the audiobook version of How to Sail Around the World Part-Time. And as a patron of any level on Patreon/slowboatsailing, you can get access to all the bonus episodes that we put up there, which include bonus chapters from the audiobook of Slow Boat to the Bahamas, bonus episode with the crew of SV Delos, and a bonus episode now of the crew of SV Parody, or better known as Wicked Salty, the YouTube channel. So we're about $15 away from our $20 goal for our Patreon drive, and I hope you join us there. I think it's a great value, and you will be well rewarded, as well as giving the cruising dreams to other sailors, whether it's in the form of giving away my book, Slow Boat to the Bahamas, if we reach our goal, or by making this podcast possible so that it's 100% free to iTunes and Stitcher subscribers. So I believe I am completely done with the provisioning for the slow boat for its big trip. But now the problem I face is that the slow boat has a grocery list of 2 degrees. So it seems to be leaning 2 degrees to starboard because I think I put all the heavy groceries on the starboard side. So I think I need to redistribute them so that the boat is a little bit better balanced. Too much canned goods, too much Parmalat milk on one side, and hopefully I'll remedy that and get rid of some of the grocery list. So if you want to see a very scared, bald, middle-aged man 3/4 of the way up the mast, you should check out the pictures I took with the selfie stick while I was putting up the topping lift for the whisker pole this weekend on Facebook/Slowboat Sailing, or in search box Slowboat to the Bahamas, my daily blog of my musings about the boat and other matters related to the water. So I think most sailors have heard of the Gulf Stream, which runs along the Florida Straits, runs by Miami, separates the Bahamas from mainland U.S. But I think maybe fewer have thought or heard about the loop current, which is really the start of the Gulf Stream and why it's called the Gulf Stream, because the loop current goes in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And for me, heading from New Orleans to Panama, the loop current stands in the way. And so the question is, do you avoid it, or do you use it to your advantage? And how do you do that? And my initial thinking was to go west of the loop current and avoid it altogether by heading south right from the mouth of the Mississippi and head towards Isla Mujeres in Mexico. Now, I may release a podcast about the check-in procedures for Mexico from the Southwestern International Boat Show that I recorded. Then again, I may not. And one of the reasons for that is that presentation kind of made me skeptical about all the hassles involved about checking into Mexico if you're not going to spend some time there. Another issue is that if you go to Isla Mujeres, then you eventually have to angle in to the northbound Gulf Stream or loop current, which is very strong near Isla Mujeres. And of course, that makes your approach to Isla very slow. The other problem is that if you go straight for Isla Mujeres, then you are downwind of Cuba, which I was planning on using Cuba to break up the trade winds, but you have to motor straight into the trade winds in a busy shipping channel of the Yucatan Channel with huge currents pushing you north. So that didn't sound super appealing and definitely added an extra weather window to the trip. To me, going to Panama from New Orleans is all about the easting. And really, the Caribbean, getting to the Caribbean, it's all about making the easting. And so where is it easiest to make it the easting against the trade winds? And, one of the things that I learned is that, the easterlies are not just limited to the trade wind belt, but, most of the winds this time of year coming out of the Gulf of Mexico are going to tend to be southeast. And that is basically the direction I want to go. So how is I'm going to best make my easting? Probably motoring in the sheltered waters of the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway. It's not completely sheltered, but it's certainly a lot more sheltered than the open ocean, and you can refuel. And so that's my current thinking for how to do that. The other benefit of that is that if I get on the east side of the loop current, which turns into the Gulf Stream, then I can get the southbound portion if I would like to, and that will speed my progress to the western tip of Cuba, Cabo San Antonio. And that will allow me to get to Cuba, where I hope to make my easting to Panama so that I can get on a parallel beam reach and use the beam reach with the easterly trade winds, which blow strong in the Caribbean, stronger than in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's enough of my plans for the summer trip for the slow boat to Cuba and eventually Panama. Let's hear from the crew of the SV Parody, better known as the crew of Wicked Salty, Wes and Kate. You guys bought a 30-foot boat from Craigslist, is that right?
That's right.
I've done that before.
It's a good site.
You can get some real good deals. I think it's better than eBay, really.
Yeah, it's better than a lot of them.
You bought it in Massachusetts, is that right?
We bought it in Rhode Island.
Rhode Island, okay. Pretty
Just
close.
about a 45-minute drive from our hometowns.
Where's your hometowns?
Kate lives in Norwell, and then I live in Scituate. Or I lived in Scituate.
What kind of sailboat did you get?
We got a 1983 Ericson 30 Plus.
Nice. Bet it's pretty roomy for the price. What was the price?
It was good. The price, I believe we got down to $11,500, and you would think it'd be roomy, but it was actually like a more racer cruiser model of the Ericson line. So the Ericson 30 is like the cruiser model, and then the 30 Plus is the racer cruiser model. So there was just like a little bit less of the storage, as you would think, for two people on the boat.
What was the beam on it?
I think it was 10.5.
Well, that's not too narrow. We bought a 30-foot CNC Red Wing or Hinterholer Red Wing from 1969. It was pretty old for $4,600.
Wow.
But it only had an 8-foot beam, so it was pretty narrow. Wasn't a ton of living space, but it was pretty comfortable and nice.
Yeah, we were lucky compared to all the other boats we'd looked at in that price range. It was really the one that needed the least amount of work and most get on and get going.
What kind of stuff did it have on it?
It had all the safety equipment other than all the required Coast Guard safety equipment other than like an E-perb and then like your fancy life jackets. It just came with like the standard, the ones that go over your neck, those orange ones. And it came with flare guns, but the flares were expired. And it came with a couple anchors, but we ended up having to change out a lot of things for our own cruising needs because the boat was really well equipped for pretty much just day sailing.
Yeah, I find that almost all boats, their anchors are way undersized when they're sold. I think that's the first thing that owners strip off the boat.
Definitely. And it was good. It worked because there was one time when we did have to emergency drop the anchor that came with the boat, and we didn't even have touched it. We didn't have touched it yet, so I threw it off like it had been sitting there the whole time since we bought it, and it worked perfectly. So I can't complain about that.
So did it have a lot of electronics on it, or not really?
It had no electronics, no electronics, no GPS, no anything. There was a really old VHF radio, but no antenna, and it only turned channels by like turning a dial, and then a digital analog thing appeared, and it was missing like a few dashes, so like some of the numbers would appear differently, and only worked when you're inside the cabin. So that was the only electronics that came with it, and it didn't even have autopilot either. So it was pretty much just a sailboat. Just get on and hopefully have another GPS.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I think you can get maybe better deals in the Gulf Coast, but the boats are probably in a little better shape up north there because they haul them out a lot.
We couldn't really do any traveling because I don't know. I didn't tell my mom I was going to do this. Kate wasn't really talking to anyone that she was going to do it. We didn't want to say oh, we're going to get on a boat and go before we had the boat or anything like that. We're not like those people who just like say we're doing things and not actually going to do them. So it was difficult to like go visit boats far away because we couldn't buy a plane ticket, go check out a boat because everyone's going to be like, you're crazy. You're not actually going to do this. So we're kind of limited with driving, finding boats, not telling anyone, going on our own.
Oh, I think that's a smart idea. I personally think it's a bad idea to run a national search, especially for your first boat.
Definitely. This next time
it's a very local thing. It's very expensive to move. And all those things that you said are true, that you have to spend a lot of money on hotels and potentially plane flights. And once you buy it, it's probably not good for transporting. Probably could find a captain to do it, but that's also expensive.
I wanted it in the water, so that was the biggest thing when we found Parody. It was already in the water. The guy had to take it from the mooring to the dock, and then he took it back to the mooring, so that was like enough faith for me to feel like it was a great boat that worked. You know, he could just turn it on, instantly go to the mooring, come back whenever I wanted, and got the survey, and it was close enough to just bring from the mooring that he had to our harbor back home.
And it has a diesel engine on it?
Yeah, it does. It has a Yanmar diesel.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, my new boat has a Yanmar. My old one had an Atomic 4, which was okay, the gasoline, but that really limits its range because gasoline doesn't have the same range per gallon.
Yeah, my dad told us that he basically wouldn't allow us to find a boat with a gas engine. He said that his experience with gas engines is that they're like a ticking time bomb, and if you're out there in the middle of the ocean and something goes wrong you basically have a bomb and you're just in a bad scenario. He said the diesels were a lot safer, and I'm pretty glad that he led us into that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a risk with gasoline, but I think all cruisers kind of run risks with gasoline because they have gasoline outboards, so you've got gasoline on your deck all the time.
Definitely.
But you do have to be sure that the blower is working, and you don't want to light anything up if the blower hasn't been running.
Definitely.
Okay, so how long did you fix it up for?
We bought the boat in July, and we were out in August. Or we were out in October, I should say. But it really didn't take too long. It was mostly kind of scrubbing, getting in the nooks and crannies with the toothbrush, and making sure it was all our own germs, I guess.
Yeah.
Before it. And then we had to wait a little bit of time to get the electronics installed.
Yeah, we did get some electronics before we left. We got a depth sounder.
It didn't have a depth sounder.
It didn't have a depth. It had original electronics, but they were all broken.
Okay.
They were just gauges.
It had one of those old school depth sounders, like on a string.
Oh yeah. We still had that. That worked great throughout the whole trip. We had a lead line on a weight, and it actually worked really well. It was like perfectly measured out to like a little over our keel depth.
Yeah, I did make a lead line before I went on my Bahamas trip, but not for depth sounding, but to check the bottoms.
Yeah.
So that's the nice thing about the lead line. If you have the wax or some petroleum jelly, you can put that on it, and then hopefully it'll pick up what's on the bottom. Give you a better idea.
Yeah, you lace it in that, and then you drop it down. It'll pick up sand or mud or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it works great, but it's helpful in turbid water. And really most of the water in the U.S. is pretty turbid.
Yeah. So pretty much straight Florida through all the way up north that's perfect for it.
Yeah. Now in the Bahamas it's a little different. You don't need that, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So it sounds like you put on a depth sounder. Did you get an autopilot for it or not really?
No autopilot. The depth sounder was actually a Garmin chart plotter, GPS, radar, all in one. It was like an all-inclusive set.
Oh, well, that's pretty fancy. You got radar.
So it was a pretty great deal for like everything. You know what I mean? It was all in one.
Did you ever use the radar?
Very limited, to be honest. I would say if someone were planning on doing the same trip as us, like taking down the mast and putting up a new radar, something like that, you don't need to do that necessarily, because the only times we were ever using the radar was when it was really foggy outside, and that's when the radar came in handy. And as well, because you can pick up channel markers if you're traveling in the ICW or wherever, Chesapeake, and you're in the deep fog. And also, obviously, if you're out there in the middle of the night, like crossing the Gulf Stream or out there in deeper waters.
And the radar went straight to your chart plotter screen.
It did, yep. And then you could even do because it was all 3-in-1, you could split the screen and make it appear like radar, chart plotter, everything. You could even overlay it.
Oh, okay. Pretty cool. Did you ever use the radar for night sailing, or did you do much night sailing with that?
We did, but I wouldn't say we used the radar a lot. The days we were out night sailing, we had great visibility, so anything we would see, we could see lights in the distance and whatnot.
I've heard some people say they were able to spot squalls with the radar. Did you find that to be the case?
We heard that afterwards. People when we were showing video of us caught in storms, they're like, why didn't you just check the radar? But to be honest, we never really thought of doing that, and we could see all the storms coming as well, And also, whenever we were in the States and with bad weather, we could just turn on our cell phone and get the Doppler, so,
Exactly. I'm surprised you had to dip your mast. Is the Ericson 30 Plus, is it meant to be trailered?
I'm not sure. It can be. It is deck stepped, so it's not the most difficult situation.
Okay, so it's got a depth step mast. Is that reinforced beneath it? Is there a pole?
It had a mast boot or shoe, and then it had there was a beam that went up through to the bottom, but the rigging and whatnot, it had inline chain plates, I believe, that went through the deck and into the cabin.
I would have thought, with the radar, you'd just get somebody on a bosun's chair and drill it on if you're going to put it on the mast, or you'd put it on an arch if you have an arch.
I think they had to wire.
I guess the difficult, was getting the wires through.
Oh, okay. All right. That makes sense. Okay. Let's see. You fixed it up for 1 month? That's right? Is that what you said?
I would say it was about a month. It was about 3 weeks it was out of the water, when you say.
Yeah.
Oh, you hauled it out of the water, and then you put it back in.
Cleaned the bottom, repainted the bottom, did the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you started going south, is that right?
That's right.
It was just all the nor'easters were coming through, so it was kind of like a bad time to leave. We actually got stuck at our first anchorage in Hadley Harbor for 5 days.
After 1 day of traveling.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
And we had already waited out a week earlier for the weather.
So maybe you got a little antsy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that's natural. I think there's kind of a little bit of a learning curve with the weather.
Oh, there was a big learning curve with the weather.
So, have you guys sailed prior to owning the Ericson 30 Plus?
I had some sailing experience in starting my early childhood, and then my dad has had cruising boats, so I've been on. He has had a Sabre. He started out with a Sabre 362, and then he sold that and moved up to a Sabre 426, and then more recently, my mom and him sold that, and then he got his own Freedom 40. So he's been moving around from boat to boat throughout the years, and I was able to get some experience. I sailed Opties when I was real young, and I also sailed 420s for 1 year after Opties, and then I went on an overnight with my dad from Scituate to Rockport, Maine. We stopped at a lot of places. Stopped at Seguin Island on the way up, and then also I went on an overnight we took one of my dad's friends' motor cruiser / sport fish, I'd say. Well, it was an older boat from Key West all the way up to Jacksonville, Florida, mostly taking the ICW, and then I went on my dad's in my mom's Sabre 426 in the Bahamas for about 2 weeks cruising.
Okay, well, it sounds like you had a ton of experience coming into this, so that's great. And you've probably seen...
To have Wes's dad was a really great sounding board. We called him the help desk.
Yeah, he was like a 24/7 help desk for those first 4 months, I'd say, and then...
He was trying to shake us loose after a while.
Yeah, he was.
We'd call him each night and tell him, the struggles of the day or the victories, and ask him if he, would recommend an anchorage nearby. We'd kind of send him a pinpoint on our phone, GPS, and...
Yeah, when we first left, we had no idea about anything about, like, anchorages or where to look or even anything like that, so... we stayed at Hadley Harbor before, so we knew that one from the way to Situate. We stopped there the first time, and then from staying in all those places in New York, Long Island Sound, we were calling up my dad every day, like, where do we go? We have no idea what we're doing.
Wow. Well, did he help you install any stuff, or was he too busy?
When we first got the boat, he came on the boat and saw it, and I had called him up before, I bought the boat without him seeing it because I sent him the ad. He lived in South Carolina at the time, and I showed him the ad, and he already knew we were looking for boats. And then when he saw that I had found the Ericson and we had already seen it once, he was just like, buy it. You're not going to have any more of an opportunity to do this, so you have to buy that boat. And I was like, okay, sounds good. So we bought it.
It really was, July came around and he wanted to leave before the fall. And
then he saw that we had this Ericson 30 Plus with the Yamaha diesel, and it was all ready to go, and he was like, get it, you have to get that boat.
Actually, on our ride home, we were driving home from seeing the boat, and we called the owner.
Yeah.
Made an offer.
Yeah.
You guys went from Massachusetts down, did you go down the ICW once you got to Virginia?
Yeah, we did. We went through
Long Island Sound, we did.
Yeah, East River to Jersey coast, outside the Jersey coast, all the way to Cape May, through the Delaware Bay, Chesapeake, and then to Norfolk, Virginia, ICW.
Did you do the ICW in Georgia?
We did. We did both ways, south and north. On the way south, we actually went out at St. Mary's and then went back in at St. Augustine. That was the first trip down south.
Okay. What problems happened when you were going down for the first time? No problems? It just went...
Definitely no.
There were... okay, so I'd say the first real grounding happened in McClellanville, and that was a pretty big deal, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So that was North Carolina.
It was a real grounding.
Yeah.
We were stuck there for an extended period of time with no hope.
Yeah.
Thinking we were going to have to swing the boom out with Wes on it to give us some leverage. It was quite nice.
And then I guess before that, that mistakes was our really big eye-opener when we were trying to leave Hadley Harbor that second day of travel after waiting out a week, and then our dinghy flew. We were towing our dinghy improperly by the grommets. We didn't even have a bridle or anything like that because we had no idea what we were doing, and we shouldn't have been towing our dinghy to begin with because it started out the weather reports of 3 to 5 foot swell, and then it slowly moved up to 5 to 6 always, and then the winds were at 30 knots plus consistently, and we were towing our dinghy just with a loop and a bridle, a loop in the grommet, and then the grommet, because the dinghy was whipping back and forth so much, it just ripped off, and we had to rescue our dinghy in these we had never been out in these conditions ever alone.
It was day 2 traveling, and we were doing a rescue mission on the day.
And we didn't know how to reef the boat at this point, so we started out traveling with full sail with the Genoa out, and then slowly had to roll that up because we had way too much sail out, and then basically the conditions were so bad that I couldn't even tinker with trying to reef because I had no idea what I was doing reefing in the first place, so I basically had to just spill out all the wind with the full main, constantly while like trying to make it to our next anchorage, like beating into the wind.
Does your main have any reef points, or does it have
has 2
roller
reef
reefing?
points.
Okay, well that's
So
good.
when we
So,
anchored
yeah.
that night,
Yeah.
like we said, we called Wes's dad, the help desk, and he taught us about reefing, and we looked in the books that night,
Yeah.
and it was like, the next day it was a whole new world.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the next day we reefed.
Awesome. You went to Florida. How did you find Florida once you got there?
Great.
We can't wait to get back.
Yeah, I know. That's where we're going to be heading down to next time we're on the boat. We're going to move down to Florida for the winter for sure.
Okay, so you enjoyed it. How long did you spend in Florida?
We
We arrived in St. Augustine for New Year's Eve.
Yep.
So we were there for the first of the year, and then
Till late March, and then we left to the Bahamas, came back, and we were in Florida briefly. We were on our way back north. We just like sped home.
Okay. And so when did you get home for your trip? When was the...
We got home July 20th. I mean, we got to Charleston like July 10th, 20th-ish, like 20th, I'd say. We were in Charleston. And to be honest, there was a time when we were like popping around Parody on a few docks, like just for free, like trying to get like a free dock until we put her up on the hard. So like there was a time we were in Charleston just like floating around from dock to dock.
Did you sell her in Charleston?
She's still for sale. We dropped her price significantly, and she's still on the hard right now. We've got a few people interested, but no one's taken immediate action quite yet.
Okay, so she's for sale in Charleston, not in Massachusetts. Okay. And when was that when you put her on the hard? What year?
We put her on the hard in like August or so. It was like end of July. It was honestly like the last week of July, I feel like. And we were kind of like, we anticipated to sell her then, and then we kind of like went back home, and then we didn't want to be back home, and we wanted to be back on the boat, so we were anticipating to moving back to Charleston and back onto Parody before we sold her, because we were always planning on selling her, but we didn't know what we were doing at the time. And then we went back to Charleston, went back to Parody, and then, decided that it wasn't going to be worth it to be putting the little money we've already saved up for this next time around into Parody just to make her in the water and like being ready to go. So we thought, scrap it. We're not going to go back and live on Parody. We're going to just continue on and try to sell her. So there was this time period when we had no idea. We were going back and forth and back and forth. We were always wanting to sell Parody. We've always been thinking about getting this next boat ever since we were in the Bahamas. But like the decision on when we were going to sell Parody was always in the air. It was like play it by ear kind of thing going.
Yeah, when we bought Parody, the entire idea was to make this trip from our hometown of Scituate down to the Bahamas and back. Really, that was what we wanted to do with Parody. And then after doing that, we realized we want to be cruisers.
Yeah, No, it was originally going to be like, Wes is making these videos for like our portfolio builder, and then we're all going to move on and get real jobs after this, and then
we fell in love with it. So, with that being said, we decided, Parody was great for what we did in that trip, but in the long term, we'd like to spend a lot of our time on the water and kind of change our lifestyle in that way. So, we're looking for something a little bit larger. With a little bit more
and to be honest, it's not like going to be like significantly larger. It's just going to be significantly more livable.
Yeah, it's also kind of a light boat. Are you looking for kind of a heavier cruising oriented boat?
We were originally like dead set on the whole like skeg and or full keel like blue water cruiser blah blah blah. But like now we really want to find a boat that we're just going to be comfortable living in. And obviously you have a good sailing boat, everything there, but we really just want to be happy and comfortable living on a great sailboat.
So, coming from living without, running water or, anything along those lines, refrigeration, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so Parody didn't have pressure water on it?
It had pressure water for sure, but
the tanks, we couldn't fill up the tanks and keep them filled up to use that amount of water.
It was like a 5-gallon hot water.
Okay.
To be honest, it mostly came out of the sink. And
how big were the tanks?
I think it was like 25 gallon.
Okay, that's not a lot.
I think there may have been 2 tanks, but it could have been equivalent to 25 gallon, or 25 to, could have been more than 30, 35.
Okay. Yeah, I think I have like 100 on my boat, which is 31 feet.
Yeah,
so.
No, definitely.
So we were limited in that way. And traveling, as a slow boat, it was more difficult to kind of stop in these places and get water when you need it. Or
we didn't have a reliable dinghy engine too, which was huge. And the rowboat worked great at first, was ergonomically perfect as a rowboat, but then our oar locks broke in St. Augustine, and so we were like canoe style rowing from then on.
Okay. Yeah, we had problems with our dinghy motor too. That's detailed in my book, and we did buy a rowable dinghy. My wife really likes it. I like it too. It's hard to carry heavy loads in, and it's definitely not as stable as a inflatable.
It's those days when you're anchored in some serious current, and there's some even strong wind out there when it could be unsafe to even go out in the dinghy, and you end up like way away from the boat. You can't even walk the shore with the dinghy.
Yeah, so I wouldn't feel comfortable, for instance, rowing our Walker Bay 8 to the docks at Exuma Markets from Stocking Island in Georgetown, Exuma.
Yeah,
which is about a mile row at least.
It's huge, I've heard.
But the seas are pretty big.
Yeah.
Between those two places, there's also traffic too. Okay, so. And that was the other thing I found in the Bahamas was that there's a lot of current. There's a lot more current than you're used to.
Definitely.
And so you do have to have a pretty efficient boat that you can get some knots on.
Definitely.
Okay.
That's why when we anchored, we would always anchor as close to the dinghy dock / beach as we could. We just went right up to there.
Okay, and so you were really having outboard motor problems most of your trip?
Oh, we didn't have an outboard motor when we left, and we bought one down in Florida. And we didn't register the dinghy because we were unsure on whether the dinghy engine would be reliable or not. And then we didn't register as well because technically you don't need to register a dinghy engine for the Bahamas. Like, they don't need a registration for your dinghy.
Well, I actually have a little experience registering a boat in Florida, and you need to be a Florida resident. So you have to convince them that you're a Florida resident to do that. So
mailed to us in the first place, being like stationed on their boat full time.
Right. They don't recognize that typically, or you have to make some convincing to say that you live on a boat.
Exactly. And we went under the radar while we had the dinghy engine, and to be honest, like, it wasn't the biggest deal. It was, it's like a 2.5 horsepower tiny dinghy engine, and we live on a sailboat.
I had a lot of problems. I think most of them were water related and also kind of fuel delivery system related. So I had to get really good at rebuilding carburetors, and also I needed basically parts. Basically the fuel filters were the things that were pretty much going bad on my pretty new outboard motors.
Did
they
you
were
have
Honda
a 4-stroke?
Yeah, I had Honda 2 horsepower 4-strokes.
That's great. With our outboard, I don't know. I think we bought a finicky outboard, to be honest, because it was on the verge of, like, I don't know. It seemed like the guy just got it working for us, to be honest, and it had worked all the way throughout Florida. It even worked straight through the Bahamas until the Exumas, and then it came the time when we needed to get new fuel, and there's no other place that sells non-ethanol fuel because you're in the Bahamas and you have to get what you can get. In the dock at Highborn Key is like the only place that sells fuel in the Exumas around. Next stop is like Staniel Key,
Exactly.
So the non-ethanol was not a choice for us, and we obviously had put treatment, we had it measured perfectly, but honestly, it was that moment when we put that new gas, the non-ethanol, the 10% ethanol gas at Highborn, and it just stopped working as great as it always did. And then weird things started happening. I had to clean the carburetor every single day. We were going to use the dinghy engine. It was like it was a daily routine, and
You would actually bring the spare parts. If we would go on a dinghy mission out to go, diving somewhere, you'd bring the parts to change it.
I brought the spark plugs. I brought everything. I brought the wrenches. I would be ready to go, and then after a while, the dinghy engine just stopped working. Even like the finicky way it even worked. And then at one point, I pulled the cord, and then all this like black kind of like. It looked like debris, but I believe it was just oil came out of the lower unit, like when I was trying to start it up. And then I raised it up, and then we put it on the back of the transom. Didn't work forever, and then all of a sudden, like we were traveling, and all this oil just dripped out of its lower unit. And then from then on, I was like, okay, I think it's done.
Well, that's happened to me too, and that was a symptom of me putting in too much oil, I believe. So I just overfilled the oil, and at some points it's kind of sprayed out where it had holes, I guess, in the lower part of its cowling. So below its cowling, it would come out. And that was a symptom of me trying to fix everything, thinking, well, maybe it was a little low on oil. And did you ever like examine your fuel? Did you ever? My engine, you could just tip it over, but yours, maybe suck out the fuel from the tank and then look at it through a bag to see if there's any water in it or see if there's any.
We didn't do that. No, I don't think we ever did that. But we did change. As soon as it stopped working, I stopped trying to run it with that gas. I poured it all out, and then we didn't use it, and then we replaced it, tried it again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then still didn't work. And then, to be honest, at that point, I really think since it was a two-stroke, I hadn't added any oil. I just added the oil with it was like the 50-1.
Right, I think the two-stroke's a little the great part of a two-stroke, and a lot of people like two-strokes because they're lighter, and if you can get a two-stroke, they like you can get more horsepower and lug it around better.
Yeah, no, it was definitely great because I could lift it one-handed onto the dinghy from the boat, but the balance was the issue.
But the downside is that once you kind of mix that fuel together, then you can't really do anything with that fuel because you can't use it in other things. Like if I had extra fuel in the outboard, I'd never leave it in the outboard because I gummed up a carburetor on another outboard before I'd left for the trip. But you could use it, for instance, in the generator. So we had a generator, or you could just put it back in the thing. Although I would definitely recommend this on your future trips is to buy a lot of Ziploc bags or Glad slider bags. Pour your fuel in there and examine it because you'll see a lot of water.
Okay. You'll see it floating. You'll see the difference. Yeah.
And the good thing about that is also if you're kind of low on fuel, you can skim out the good stuff and leave the watery stuff on the bottom because the water goes to the bottom.
Yeah.
We definitely would have tried that.
I know. It turned into a point where I think we were going to have to replace our lower unit, and we had bought the whole thing for like $200 or something, and it's kind of like, do you put the extra money into rebuilding it, or do you just buy a new engine?
Well, it sounds like you got kind of a good deal, but it didn't work out. I mean, I had more or less brand new engines. One was from 2011, one was 2015 because I bought it in 2015 because I wanted a spare. And, I had problems with them, and I think everybody has problems with them. Everybody I talked to were telling me the same thing. It's probably a fuel problem. And I, it took me a while to really absorb that. The other thing I'd recommend if you're getting a newer outboard is to get the shop manual for that, because you will have to fix your own outboard if you're going to the islands. And so If you have the shop manual and if you have the spares, then you're set up as well as the folks at a dealership. So, one of the things I found in Key West, for example, that was the first time we found a place that had parts. Well, I mean, we could have found parts earlier, but we didn't have time to. But that was the first time we kind of found a place with a mechanic that conceivably was willing to work on our engine, and they just had outboard after outboard lined up, right? And they were just not working on the outboards continually. So if you dropped off your outboard with them, you would have had to wait for like 3 weeks before they touched it. And obviously, if you're living on a mooring or living on at anchor, you can't wait 3 weeks. You need to have it now. And there's just no
a friend.
Right. You need a friend, but you can't afford to wait versus somebody that just goes to their boat on the weekends.
Exactly.
Okay. It seems like you guys are very good at catching fish, so I need some tips on how to catch fish better off the back of my boat.
Okay. Well, we are good at catching fish. We didn't catch a lot of fish in the videos because it wasn't our priority. We didn't have refrigeration. It was hard to get bait, et cetera, et cetera. But best way to catch fish, I would say, is if you have conch or conch slop, you catch a conch and then you get the slop, the extras, you use that as bait. That's like the best bait for fish is conch slop.
Oh, you're talking about as you're anchored.
Yep, as you're anchored, definitely. And I'm just talking about so the first thing is you get bait, or if you're using artificials, but we always use bait, hook and line.
No,
I was thinking more on passage, like the kind of the big fish.
Okay, big fish, I'd say you want to troll those. We would troll cedar plug. We didn't have the best luck with the cedar plug, not gonna lie, this time around, but I have caught like 14 different species on the cedar plug, ranging from, wahoo to kingfish to blackfin tuna on just the cedar plug. So you may want to write that down, cedar plug for the lure. And also I've heard what also works great are those colorful skirt lures that are kind of squid-like. They have like the pink and the yellows and the greens. We didn't have any of those, but I've heard those worked phenomenally for trolling. And we also used a bucktail, which is more of a New England kind of lure, but we had a lot of those, so we used a bucktail. And you're going to get the most luck trolling in deeper waters and drop-offs. So, like, Exuma Sound is a great place to troll. The tongue of the ocean is a great place to troll. Right next to Chubb is a great place to troll. Crossing a bank is the worst place to troll. If you're crossing a shallow bank, you're going to get barracuda every time.
Oh, and you don't want barracuda?
We don't like barracuda. Like, there's a lot of people who eat barracuda. They're a little bit more of a challenge. They've got sharp teeth. You don't want to get an injury when you're out there alone in the Bahamas. It could be a serious injury. It could be a small injury. You don't know.
And since they eat a lot of reef fish,
they eat tons of reef fish.
The Cigartaria.
Yeah,
right.
They are the number one fish that has the Cigartaria disease, which is a food-borne disease. When you eat it, you will be like thrown on your bed for like a day and a half. We've heard.
And that never goes away.
Yeah, exactly. And they eat the most reef fish, and they eat like tons of fish, and the big ones especially you have to avoid. We've heard to eat.
I think the only other little piece of advice, I got a little frustrated. We're always trolling the line, we're always reading and trying to catch these fish. I don't think that we were really traveling fast enough.
Kate, that's the thing. Yeah.
No, moving at we averaged about 4 knots, and I think if we had kicked it up to like 6 knots, it would have definitely.
True. These faster, more feistier sport fish.
Just not much more, but just like cruising at 6 knots, I think
5.5 even.
Right, would have made a difference.
So pretty much the best way to catch fish we saw is spear fishing. One is the best, most instantaneous way. You always know what you're catching. But then when you catch a small fish spear fishing. You catch a smaller reef fish, cut them up, eat that, and then take its belly meat and use the fish belly meat as just throw it off your boat at anchor.
And you just leave that unattended, or you're just sitting there with it?
You sit there with it because you will see interactions, and you want to make sure you I'd say if you want to sit there and not touch it, you get a circle hook instead of a straight hook. Circle hook will set itself more likely. And you you adjust the drag so they can take the line and everything. But we had a lot of exciting, anchorage fights. That was so much fun.
So when you're trolling, do you put a weight on the trolling line?
Yeah, you can put an inline sinker on it, and honestly, it just takes adjusting. You got to play with it. You got to maybe start it off at the surface and try it out for 30 minutes. That's not working. Put an inline sinker on, drop it down. Also adjust to see. It's all adjustments. And basically, the number one advice I could give for trolling is not the depth or it out, is to check your line to make sure you're not dragging seaweed. If you're dragging seaweed, you're never going to catch anything. You always got to make sure there's nothing towing on that line.
Okay, so you have to clean the seaweed all the time.
Exactly. You got to make sure you're never going to catch anything if you're towing seaweed. You can tell if you're towing it by just touching the line. Like it's so much more heavy,
So there's not a particular depth you think if it's pretty close to the surface, that's okay?
Yeah, surface. Honestly, we've heard surface, and then right outside of where your wake is where and then there can even be a more particular way. If there's heavy seas, you could have it just on the crest or just off of the crest. You don't want it splashing up in the trough or anything like that.
So you're thinking you don't think you need to drag it 50 feet away, maybe
no
10 feet away?
On a sailboat.
So maybe 10 feet away or 20 feet away?
I'd say at least 30.
At least 30, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do need to put out a little bit of line.
Definitely, because they will get spooked by the boat. Once you get them close to the boat, they'll do another run.
Okay. But in terms of it's submerging, doesn't necessarily need to submerge.
I would say the further out you put it, the further it will go down.
Okay, so it...
You don't think that? The further line, yeah, definitely.
If you have the sinker on it,
Either way, because the line's going to weigh down the lure. It will go down further the further you put it out.
So did you do much spear fishing in the Bahamas?
Did a ton. Got so much better at spear. I'd never spearfished before in my life. I didn't have any gear, was the biggest issue. So basically, all the spearfishing I did was no weight belt, just a bathing suit and a spear, and it was so challenging.
Yeah, I found that the ability to dive. Now, how do you recover the weight belt? You just kind of dive for it or something?
The weight belt, you basically just put enough weight on you so that you stay at a neutral buoyancy, and you always have it on. It's a little scary swimming with the weight belt at first, because you go down 30 feet and you're not automatically going to go back up. You got to push your way all the way back up.
Okay. Yeah, you spend a lot of energy just pushing yourself down without a weight belt.
Exactly. The first time I had a weight belt on, it kind of spooked me because I didn't get that rising sensation to get to the surface. I was like, wow, I would just stay down here if I didn't do anything about it.
And what kind of spear did you have?
It was a Gotku pole spear. It was actually one of the best pole spears you can get on the market, and my brother bought it for me for before we left. It's a going away present.
So you didn't use the Hawaiian sling and stuff like that?
No, it was a Gotku pole spear, and it was super long.
How long was it?
What's up?
How long was your pole spear?
I think it was 9 feet.
Whoa! Okay.
But you could also take out the middle part. And
okay.
Shrink it down to around 5 feet.
Okay, I got you. So I was wondering how you're going to put that in the hatch.
They came apart 3 pieces.
Okay.
And then you could even have it smaller, in use. But I found it best to have that 9 feet because I'm so bad at spearfishing that I spook a fish real easily, and having that extra range makes a big difference in getting that fish.
Now, I bet you have a lot of spearfishing videos on your channel.
Yeah, a decent amount, but not a lot of hits. You know what I mean? It was super hard for me to get the action of catching it because I was so new at spearfishing. I wasn't focused on filming. I was get the fish priority.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, but I did film. We met up with a really good buddy who was like one of the most phenomenal spear fishermen we met, and I filmed him just getting the fish one time. I didn't even go for any. I just filmed him spearing fish.
Okay, and what video is that?
It's called Spearfishing Bahamas.
Okay, so how many videos do you have on your channel?
I think it's approaching just about 80 right now.
All right. It's very popular. Everybody seems to like it. I think everybody be really happy when you guys get your new boat and
Yeah, definitely.
get to see you guys going out there again. If you get your new boat, when you get your new boat, where do you want to go?
We want to go straight to Florida, and then we want to go right back to the Bahamas, probably. And then I also want to go to all those places we missed in the Bahamas. I want to go down to Georgetown, obviously, but moreover, I want to go to, like, Long Island, maybe check out, like, Conception, all those places. And then also, we definitely want to go to the BVIs, I'd say.
Okay, so in the first year, you think you'll probably just loop the Bahamas and go back to Florida, or try the thorny path down to the BVI?
Either the first year, we'll just go down a marathon, see if we want to cross, and then maybe go back north, and then the second year go back down to Florida and then cross. Like, we're not sure if we want to go yet. We just want to be on the boat, really.
Yeah, we have no idea. It's so far in advance that we really don't have much of an idea, but we're so excited to plan it out.
Basically, it's like, get on the boat and then make sure you're not cold on the boat. That's the priority.
Yeah, that's good. I guess you need to get fairly south to not be too cold. But it even gets cold in Marathon, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Well, it was great talking to you. Are there any things that I didn't ask you about but you'd like to put in the podcast?
Well, I can't really think of anything in particular. Mainly, maybe for people who are just interested in going in general, I'd say don't be focused on getting the perfect boat and focus on just getting a boat that will get you out there and don't worry about all the autopilot, refrigeration, solar panel, all that stuff. Just get a boat that will get you on the water and start making you learning everything about sailing and cruising. And then maybe the second time around, after you've already fallen in love with it, then focus on refining your searches.
I guess that brings up a good point. So how did you deal with kind of charging issues? You just ran your engine?
Yeah, we for like charging our laptops and whatnot,
charging the batteries. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we would charge everything when we were underway, and then if we were at anchor for an extended period of time, we would just turn on our engine, charge our laptops, turn it off.
Okay, and your alternator was enough to keep you going.
Definitely, but we really did have to like run the engine. We couldn't really like charge too much or leave too much on for an extended period of time without that. We didn't want to risk it, to be honest.
Well, it was great talking to you guys. Have fun.
Nice to meet you, Linus.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you. It was nice talking to you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Slow Boat Sailing Podcast. In the next episode, episode 14, we will have Nikki Steiger of White Spot Pirates. She's got a great YouTube channel, and I caught up with her after she sailed from Panama to Isla Mujeres in Mexico. Thanks for listening. Tell your friends. Have them subscribe for free. If you'd like to get bonus content, go to Patreon/slowboatsailing and help out the podcast. For a limited time, we're letting patrons like Aurora record the intro or the outro to the podcast. Check out my books at Amazon.com, How to Sail Around the World Part-Time, and Slow Boat to the Bahamas. Goodbye for now and have some fun on the water.
Hi, I'm Jana Wilson. Thank you for listening to the Slow Boat Sailing Podcast. Subscribe to our free newsletter at slowboatsailing.com.